All right, Notre Dame's 15-1 in its past 16 at home, but definitely facing an upgrade in competition despite what we see in Michigan and Syracuse on the schedule. Nothing close to what they're going to see this week when they host the Stanford Cardinal. We bring in Don King of Last Word on Sports. Hey, Don, thanks so much for joining us. Let's dive right into it with Stanford because at this point in the season, we talked about it just a few minutes ago before we came on, you'll see statistics that don't mean a whole lot because 4 or 5 games under the belt, but Stanford's played Washington on the road, they've played USC, they've played 2 formidable offenses, and still number 1 ranked in rush defense and total defense and scoring defense. So this Stanford defense, despite all the losses we talked about in the offseason, still just extremely stout.
Yeah, the defense is legitimate, and that was obviously a huge question coming into the season, and I think that one's been proven out already. I think you can count on the Stanford defense, assuming some modicum of health, to be really, really good throughout the entire year. And the defense is healthy now. As a matter of fact, Joe Hemscott comes back this week. He didn't play in the Washington game, so one of the linebackers who sometimes starter, sometimes reserve. He's played a little nickelback too. He's a very versatile guy, provides some needed depth at the linebacker position, and I'll tell you, he wasn't missed terribly last week. Some of those youngsters have really grown up, and they look great in the defense this year.
Hey, Don, let's look at the offense. We talked about it after the USC game, and the bugaboo is still around after the Washington game, getting into the red zone, missing field goals, not converting on third down, not doing the things that we stereotypically think of Stanford. So on the negative side, we think, this team's better than its athleticism. They're really not that fast or athletic, which is generally a misnomer. And then on the plus side, we think, they're always going to be fundamentally sound, always do the right thing, always take care of the football. But that's not necessarily the case this year either.
No, it's not. A couple of things stand out. On the negative side, Hogan has just got to be better. He's got to take care of the ball better. You can't fumble in the red zone, within the 10-yard line. Just cannot let that happen. Had another fumble in the Washington game that Stanford recovered somehow miraculously and then went on to miss a field goal, as you alluded to as well. So there are some solid fundamental things that the team has just got to improve on. The last thing I'd mention, the offensive line is incredibly talented, but they're still young and they're still gelling, and those kids have had some uncharacteristic false starts from a Stanford standpoint, some holding penalties. There have been some things that have gone on that just don't traditionally happen with Stanford football, and I think that stuff is getting rectified and is going to be straightened out, but it's not all the way there yet. Here's hoping that it comes together to a greater degree this coming Saturday, but there are some things that need to be ironed out there. And, the red zone, it doesn't make a ton of sense. This team is constructed much like the ones that were so good in the red zone in 2011 and 2012, or 2012 at least once Hogan took over as the starter. It should be much better than it has been thus far.
We all saw on national TV Tyler Gaffney just slug it out against Oregon, get the football 40, 43 times, whatever it was last year, and that was pretty much the deal. Not to that extent, but the deal every game for Stanford with Gaffney in the lineup. It's a completely different approach this year with a slew of running backs. Now, that could be good, that could be not so good, because the kid doesn't necessarily be able to get into a rhythm running the football if he's the best guy. But on the other hand, you keep these guys fresh and you utilize their different talents. So your thoughts about the running back by committee approach?
Yeah, here's what I'm seeing, and it's fascinating, and I don't know that it's what I anticipated before the season started, but it seems like 2 guys actually are kind of separating from the pack, and they certainly aren't the 2 I would have projected. You're seeing good production from Kelsey Young, who got the start at Washington, started the second half as well, and had a critical 12-yard carry to set up the Hogan bootleg touchdown run that put away the Washington game, between the tackles. So he's looked really good in spots. And secondly, Remound Wright, he of the oh-so-unfortunate chop block penalties. I'm going to need him to stop trying to block people below the waist. But other than that, he's been pretty impressive running the ball. He's shown good toughness and good strength. He was the short yardage running back last season. He's the biggest of the guys who have been in the rotation. So, he's the only one who's even near 200 pounds. So he's got a little bit of size to him. And he's done well, and he was the leading rusher in the Washington game. So spelling the two of them, you're seeing Barry J. Sanders as expected, but more in the passing game than just lining up and getting the rock behind the line of scrimmage. And the freshman Christian McCaffrey had another one of those really special burst kind of plays in the Washington game late in the first half. So it kind of seems to be those four guys who are getting it done in the backfield, and plus some very creative uses of Ty Montgomery, he of the run you over from the 5-yard line and push you into the end zone. That guy's just really hard to get down on the ground. So I'm in favor of any way you can get the ball into his hands.
All right, Don, if you need a field goal late in the game, Jordan Williamson, a senior, is 4 for 8. So is he better than that?
He should be better than that. The kid is the all-time leading scorer in Stanford football history, but he does seem prone to the yips from time to time. I mean, he had that huge game winner against Oregon year before last up at Autzen, but there have been numerous examples now of him, kind of losing his form a little bit and missing makeable field goals in critical situations in a number of different games. And there have been a couple where that's been overcome, but there have been a couple where it hasn't. I don't know what the answer is. I don't know if I suspect it's a little bit between the ears, but Stanford's going to struggle if he doesn't get that straightened out between here or there. There are several field goal or less games left on the schedule this year. He's going to have to get it together for the team to have the success it wants.
Don, let's talk some Notre Dame football. This is where the top 25 drives me crazy. So Notre Dame starts out at 18. It's not their fault that Michigan's horrible. Right. Michigan's supposed to be good. It's not their fault that the schedule's extremely tough, but it's all backloaded. So the first 4 games, nothing. Rice and Michigan, Syracuse, and whatever the other game, Purdue. But at the same time, they've risen from 18 to 8, beating nobody. Now they're going to face somebody. So I don't know that this team's really proven anything to date. Your thoughts about what the Irish bring?
Here are a couple of thoughts. First of all, Everett Golsen picked up where he left off 2 seasons ago, and honestly, I think he's a much better quarterback than he was then. So from a Stanford readiness standpoint, they're going to have to be prepared to see somebody who's more mature and more a true quarterback as opposed to an athlete. A definite upgrade versus Siler Miles last week up in Washington, who's got a ton of potential, but he's not a true quarterback yet, as much as he is an athlete playing the quarterback position. Golsen is solid and he's really strong, and I expect him to play well. If he makes the number of mistakes he made against Syracuse, though, the Domers are going to get beat, but I don't really expect him to make those same mistakes at home. On the flip side, and this is something that it seems to me like some of the AP pollsters and perhaps many of the other analysts have forgotten. I don't think the sharps out in Las Vegas have forgotten this, though. Notre Dame is still down those 4 key contributors who were suspended for academic reasons at the beginning of the season, and that's leaving this game as a pick'em, if not Stanford as the slight favorite going into Saturday's matchup. I've seen the line at Stanford -1. I've seen it at even, and that's despite the 3-point home advantage that Notre Dame gets. I think the loss of those 4 players hasn't made a difference in the schedule to date. It could very well be the difference in the ball game this coming Saturday. They need that depth, and this is a team that's going to hit you with everything it's got over and over and over again. There's bound to be a little bit of attrition on both sides. Depth is critical, and I think that's going to be a struggle for Notre Dame to pick up the slack from those guys who are just no longer there with no time to prepare for them being out of the lineup prior to the start of the season.
Yeah, it's a young football team. You mentioned the 5 turnovers against Syracuse. They could do that against the Orange. I caught a lot of that game on replay. They were so much better than Syracuse. They could have won that game by 4 or 5 touchdowns, but they kept him in the game, turning the football over. Brian Kelly mentioned this week that he's not going to put a whole lot of different concepts into the passing game or into the offense because they've got to focus on details. They've got to focus on handing the football off. They've got to focus on ball protection and the details in the offense before they can move on and do some different things. The defense, very aggressive. They blitz from all over the place. They come at you from all over the place. Two more thoughts on this one, Don, I'd like to get from you. Number one, last time you went to Notre Dame didn't turn out so well, and there's still controversy over that game and the play at the goal line and the famed goal line stand by Notre Dame. So your thoughts about a little payback possibly.
Yeah, I'll tell you, that was a rough day. I was waterlogged from that one for about 2 weeks afterward. It was miserable out there, and I was all the way on the other end of the field. Didn't have a look from within the stadium at that last play at the goal line. All of the replays I've seen, I still think Stefan got in, but they didn't ask me. So it is what it is. And the bottom line is you can't let it come down to a one call in overtime on the road at the very end of a football game. You got to be better than that and provide some separation and take advantage of the opportunities that you do have to punch the ball into the end zone. So it really shouldn't have come down to that anyway. I think Stanford was the better team that day, but made the kind of mistakes it's not going to be able to afford to make this Saturday if it plans to go into fabled Notre Dame Stadium and come out with a win.
All right, lastly, Don, Notre Dame USC has been long established as probably the best out-of-conference rivalry in college football.
Yep.
This home series has been going on for a few years with Stanford and Notre Dame. Do you like the series? Do you think it's good for these programs, good for college football?
I love this series. I would say overall this might be the third best rivalry that Stanford's got, only behind the Cal big game each year and the rivalry with USC, which has definitely picked up some spice, since the Harbaugh-Carroll days just a few years ago. So I think this is a very important and meaningful rivalry for both teams. They actually play for the Legends Trophy, which I learned doing a little bit of reading this week. So it's a trophy game for each of the programs. Sadly, though, this is one of those series that's slated to end, given Notre Dame's expanded presence and agreement with the ACC and the games it'll be adding on a year-to-year basis. So it doesn't look like this one is going to continue much further into the future unless something shifts, which I think is kind of a shame. I love this rivalry. These schools compete for a lot of the same recruits. There's a lot of crossover, but it's a great intersectional kind of litmus test for both teams, and it's been a lot of fun. I hope they find a way to see it continue because it's something that I enjoy and certainly know plenty of people with Notre Dame ties or Notre Dame fandom that I get to go back and forth with every year as this rivalry is played out. So here's hoping they find a way to keep it up, but we'll see what happens. In the meantime, this Saturday's game has huge implications for the college football playoff chances for both teams and should be a lot of fun to watch.
Yeah, with Stanford's schedule, the voters should forgive the 13-10 loss against USC, especially considering USC, given all the credit, they won the football game fair and square, but the way Stanford kind of laid it out there for them, plus they've got the schedule built up so heavily that there's so many big games between Stanford and the finish line that they can make up for that. On Notre Dame's side, of course, undefeated, and if they could somehow make it through that schedule, even with one loss, they should be in good shape as well because it's going to get really tough for them. And Don, don't get me started on Notre Dame's affiliation with the ACC. You either join a conference or you don't join a conference.
Amen, amen, brother. I agree with you on that one. I completely agree. And to the point you mentioned, I think either of these teams could still make the playoff with one loss. So this is a critical game for either. I think Notre Dame has a tough ask to go down to Tallahassee and beat Florida State. And Stanford's already got a loss. Stanford's going to have to run the table and win the Pac-12, I think, to get one of those 4 playoff slots. So it can't afford to lose this weekend, and I really don't think Notre Dame can afford to drop this game and have a reasonable shot at making the playoff either. So it's kind of it's an elimination game almost for the college football playoff chances for both programs, which makes it almost much must-see TV.
A weekend full of great college football matchups. This one of the best. Stanford visiting Notre Dame. Don King of Last Word on Sports, key contributor here. We just appreciate, with all that you got going on, that you still make some time for us, Don.
Thanks for making time for me, Mark. Good to see you.